As entrepreneurs, we all have a reason why we chose to leave our 9 to 5 for an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm here to capture those stories of why we all hustle and grind for our companies. From pro-snowboarder to money mogul, Chris Naugle has dedicated his life to being America's #1 money mentor, with a core belief that success is built not by the resources you have, but by how resourceful you can be. His success and national acclaim have come in large part to what he's learned firsthand from seeking a better way to wealth creation and preservation than he learned growing up. Chris has built and owned 19 companies, with his businesses being featured in Forbes, ABC, House Hunters, and his very own HGTV pilot in 2018. He is currently founder of the Money School, which teaches you to solve your money problems by putting you back in control of your money. He is also founder and CEO of the Private Money Club, a unique, first-of-its-kind community for real estate lenders and borrowers. His success also includes managing tens of millions of dollars in assets in the financial services and advisory industry and in real estate transactions. As an innovator and visionary in wealth building and real estate, he empowers entrepreneurs, business owners, and real estate investors with the knowledge of how money works. Chris is also a nationally recognized speaker, author, and podcast host. He has spoken to and taught over 10,000 Americans, delivering the financial knowledge that fuels lasting freedom. Hey, Chris, I am incredibly honored to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate you, man.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, awesome. So let's just start in. I've been telling your story for about 7 years now, so I generally know it, but it's just such an awesome story because not many people have had the experiences you've had. So what I'd like you to do, can you start with like Fat Man and how that started and how old were you? That's the other
Yeah,
thing too.
my
Right?
gosh, I feel like you could tell the story just as well as I could at this point. But you know, just as a boy, I grew up in a family where my mom always taught me to dream, no matter what it was I wanted. And when I was 16, I'd gotten a big boy job working at a restaurant. Prior to that, I had just worked on my friend Jack's dad owned a farm. So I worked on the farm from 14 till 16. So at this restaurant, I was what they would call prep cook. So I worked with the lead cook who was the owner's son.
Mm.
And the guy treated me horribly. I mean, just degraded me every single day, made me feel like garbage. I mean, I dreaded going into work. I would tell my mom, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. She says, it'll be fine. He'll be better today. And he never was. And I remember it just gets to a breaking point, a boiling point. And I quit one day and I came home and I told my mom that I wanted to open a clothing line in the basement because I had to have a plan. I couldn't just quit my first real job and come home and tell mom, hey, mom, I quit. It's like I needed something as a backup, like a plan B. And Fat Clothing Company was plan B. And I literally did that. I started printing shirts with my art teacher, Mr. Mahalski. Printed the first dozen shirts. It was called Fat Clothing Company, PHAT, and I sold them out of my backpack. Then I made 2 dozen shirts and sold my bed out of the backpack, and I made 2 dozen shirts and a dozen hats. And by this point, my friends had seen what I was doing, and they wanted some shirts, but they didn't have money, and we're all just teenagers, broke teenagers. And I'm like, well, hey, if you take these shirts and you sell these, I started with hats. If you sell these hats, I'll give you one for free when you sell 5 of them. And then I started building a sales team in high school, and that's the first company. And then I got some press in the Union Sun and Journal and so on. But that was all good and great until, and at that point I was trying to be a pro snowboarder. So I was traveling all over the East Coast to snowboard competitions. And I would take my clothing line. I put it in like, we would all know it as a suit bag, but back then that was like my garment bag. I put all my clothing in that garment bag. I had order forms and brochures that I made, and I would travel around to all the snowboard shops that were on the way to whatever contest I was going to, and I would pitch my clothing. I would try to sell my clothes, and some of it was consignment, some of it was wholesale. So I started learning that side. But I was at this one shop called Hard Packed, and the owner's name is Tim. And he did an order for me. I think it was like $500, which at that time was actually a good size order for me. I'm like, oh my God, $500, because the profit on that was like $200 or something. That was enough to keep me going for a week or 2 weeks in some cases. And he said after he did the order, he's like, hey, you want to go ride? And I'm looking around. I mean, it's probably 11 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, yeah, but when? What time do you guys close? And he said, well, we close at 5, but we can go ride right now. And I'm thinking, all right, well, maybe he's got someone coming in. But I ask him, I just say, Tim, like, is someone coming in to watch the shop? And, like, would you want to go right now? But like, do we have to wait for someone? He says, no, I'll just close the store. I don't know why, but at that point, I'm like, wait a second. You're just going to close and we can just go ride? Like, that's how this whole thing works? I'm like, sign me up. So I started literally coming up with the idea for this skateboard, snowboard shop. And I was working with this guy that I was selling shirts for this guy at the flea market. You would know the Walden Flea.
Yeah.
And he
Super
also had
flea.
the similar idea, but he was older. So he had a little bit of money, and we're talking about doing a skateboard shop in the Lockport Mall. And I'm like, yeah, but you got to sell snowboards too. And anyway, this idea was coming and taking shape, and we really started getting serious about it. I did a business plan. We did renderings. We had our friend Chris Crenshaw, who drew art for the shirts. He would put together designs, and Fat Man Board Shop literally took shape on paper. And then it just came down to the point where I needed the money. I
Yeah.
needed $70,000
And
to
there's a
open the
great story
shop.
behind that.
Yeah, to open this shop in the good old, well, God
The old
rest its
Lockwood?
soul, but the Lockport Mall, which is no longer there.
Yeah, but that place was great. Superfleet was interesting. That was an experience. If you're in Buffalo area and you're of a certain age, you knew Superfleet, and you'd probably been there before, and it was unique. It was
Just
good
the
for it
people
was cheap.
watching, just the
Yeah,
people watching was
better
worth
than Walmart.
every second of the time that I spent there. Didn't
Yeah,
matter what I was doing, but just watching. I mean, it was almost like being in a Marvel Comics book.
yep.
Every single day you're like, oh my God, I didn't know they made them like that.
That's different. They're people different than us, and you stuck to the floors, and it was interesting. It was a unique experience, but it was a whole lot of fun and a lot of good memories behind it. But so you needed funding. You're what, like 17 at this point?
I
You
was
need
17.
70 grand. There's there's another story behind that. That's like, what I really would love to hear you tell is that story, like up not just the last part, but kind of all the way through how that funding happened and what you were doing. Because I want to make sure that especially teen entrepreneurs know that sometimes you just have to hustle for whatever you're doing. And there's like not.
No, keep going, keep going. I got props.
Oh, you have props.
I know most people are listening, but it's just ironic. I found this in when we were moving to this new office. I found this. This right here is the original loan proposal and business plan for Fat Man Surf Skate Snow. I mean, and this was, what would this be, 1993 that I built this?
Yeah.
93 to 96 era, somewhere in there. But I mean, this had projections, marketing plans. I had no idea how to do this. Anybody that does computers would laugh if they looked at my spreadsheets. This was like, I don't know if this is right when Excel came out, but this was like early days of Excel. But
Mhm.
so how it all goes with this story is, I spent 6 months researching skateboard, snowboard shops, found very little info because there just wasn't a lot of them. And
Mm.
I wrote this business plan. And it was up to that point, this was one of the hardest things that I'd ever done. I mean, they don't teach you how to write business plans in school, but I
Yeah.
did have an accounting teacher, and Mr. I think it was Mr. Crawley was his name. You always isn't it funny how, Andrew, how you always remember the names of the people that believed in you,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I mean, this is going back to, I mean, listen, like, how many years ago was 1993, 94? I mean, that's
Yep.
a long time, but yet I still remember these two teachers and a couple others. I remember what they looked like. I remember their class. It was
Mhm.
because they took such an interest in what I was doing and made such a positive impact. And they just supported what I was doing in a time when everybody else did not support what I was doing. I mean, and when I say everybody else, clearly I did a loan proposal and a financial analysis to get 70 grand at 17 years old. I went around to my entire family, which my family doesn't really have money, but I still did. And every one of them told me, I'm proud of you, but this is probably not a good idea. You're going to lose all your money. We're not interested. My dad, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but he said something like, this is a dumb idea. Just come over to Harrison Radiator and, I'll get you an interview and you can work at the factory, and be like dad. Right.
Mhm.
And gosh, I asked everybody. I got turned down by every single bank, and most banks wouldn't even look at it. I mean, they see
Mhm.
this 17-year-old punk skateboard kid walk through the door, and I was trying to dress up as much as I could. And they would ask me questions like, well, what do you have for collateral? I didn't even know what collateral was,
Yeah.
and then I had to ask one of the bankers, and they told me, and I'm like, well, I got a KX 125. I got a baseball card collection. And you see that 86 blue Buick, that two-tone blue? Yeah, that's because I got hit in the front end. Yeah, that I could put that up for collateral too. And it was just a dead issue with everybody. But what ended up happening is my mom watched all this from afar because my mom didn't have any money. But
Mhm.
I came back and I told my mom, I said, this one bank, which I'll leave the bank name out, said that they like the project, they really like it, and they would do an SBA backed loan, which I guess is backed by the government, but they need collateral in the amount of the loan,
Mhm.
and I don't know what to do. And she said, well, how much collateral do they need? And I said, 70 grand. Well, my mom was quick to know that her house had about $70,000 in equity. It was a tiny little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house that we grew up in. She still lives in today. And I can't remember exactly how it transpired, but she literally knew that she was the last step and the
Mhm.
last person that could keep this dream alive. And she ended up saying, well, I'll put the house up for collateral. And I remember just taking a double take, like, you're gonna do what? You're gonna put the house up for collateral. And she said, yeah, but if you fail, we're gonna have to find somewhere else to live because they're gonna take the house. And I said, "Oh, mom, I won't fail. Look at the numbers." And I went into my fancy dancy financial analysis. Look at this. I'm going to be rich. I'm going to make $30,000 a year. Now, all of you listening, like, that's real.
Yeah.
Back then, 17 years old, I was actually turning 18 when this happened because, the store, it was November
Mhm.
when it actually happened. But $30,000 back then was a life-changing number. Like, and I know today you're like, oh my God, how would you survive? But back then, to a 17-year-old, that would have been the equivalent probably of me making today $1 million. I mean, just if you put things side by side, like in the grand scheme of things, 30 grand back then would probably be like me making $1 million today, and in the
Mhm.
valuation of that. But yeah, so that's what happened. My
Yeah.
mom put her house, our house on the line so that I could get this Fat Man board shop SBA backed loan. I just thought it was funny, Andrew, that I actually had this right there, and yeah, balance sheet, profit and loss. So when people are like, "Hey, do you know anything about running a business or anything about financials?" I'm like, "Nah, I don't know anything.
Just a couple, just 30 some
Nothing
odd
at
years of
all."
experience. We're good. Just a couple of years. And this was like pre-Excel and everything. So any drawings in
No,
there?
I think Excel was around because, like, I mean, if Excel wasn't around, how the heck did I create these amazing spreadsheets? I mean, look at that thing.
Oh, there. Okay. Oh,
I mean, it
wow.
had to be Excel. Maybe it
Dude,
was some other program. I don't know, but like, legitimately, like, that's Excel and this is Word, and right there,
nice.
purchased the store, $70,000 loan, and I had it broken down: 30,000 in inventory, 14,997 in equipment and fixtures, 15,000 in the partner who I was buying out and his goodwill. Oh, dude. Crazy,
Nice.
crazy.
But you're talking about teachers. I mean, I think teachers are huge. Mine was Mr. Lawton, and it was one of those. He was the one who was encouraging me to start a video production company, and so it was. You always have that teacher in high school, like that one that just really drives you to live those dreams for whatever reason it was. So no, I totally understand, and he's actually one of the reasons why I was in technology field. So I mean, it's just that's a huge thing for me. So yeah, it's
And
amazing
then
how you can get that.
and then explain to me why teachers aren't paid more money, like when they are the ones
Oh
that
yeah.
literally shape the minds of our youth, and they're at the low end of the spectrum when it comes to pay. I
Yeah.
feel like it's backwards.
And we don't, and I think one of the things that really bothers me about it too is we don't, as, even now, and especially now, because back in our day, it was a lot easier. Right now, we have to go and seek out people to be able to do it. It's not like there's a business course you can take. There might be a business teacher somewhere, but not really any sort of education that can help us to become entrepreneurs. We kind of have to take our own route. We kind of have to do what you did with the pizza store and kind of say, I reject my reality and I substitute my own. I'm going to do this differently.
Yeah,
And I think that's a huge thing right now. That's a soapbox that I can spend about 30 minutes alone on. But I just think like we saw with you. I mean, it would make such a huge difference and such a huge impact on people's lives and kids' lives.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. So you got your 70,000, you got your now for people that don't live in the Buffalo area, just kind of a bit of history on this one. If you lived kind of north of the city of Buffalo, you bought your first skateboard from Chris. It's kind of how it went. It was
It
like
really
fat man
was
and
how it
helper.
went.
Yeah. My brother bought his first skateboard from you, by the way. I think you actually sold it to him. So many years ago. So you got your 70,000, you're doing your thing, you're building these companies. Let's kind of fast forward a little bit. So you were a pro snowboarder, you built these companies going on. Um, let's go into a kind of see go into the story about how many different, what am I trying to say, shops you had? Because you had more than one.
Yeah, I had three stores, and the third store was opened in a little ski town, it was close to the ski resort called Orchard Park, kind of
Hmm.
a wealthier area because it's over by the Bills Stadium, so it's where a lot of the Buffalo Bills live,
Yeah,
and it was closer to the hill. I say hill, some of you would think mountain, but here we have hills,
it's a hill.
so it just made sense. But we kind of went out on the line, and we spent a lot of money designing this store because we wanted it to be a boutique. I was really back then I was fascinated by a company called Supreme, which all of you know Supreme now, but back then it was just this tiny little New York City minimalist shop that I went into when I was, going to New York City for these trade shows. And then there was a Stussy store there as well. So every time I'd go to New York City on trade shows, I would always go to Supreme and I would go to Stussy and I would just marvel the simplistic view that like everything was minimalist. Like, and if you don't understand it, like, let's just say there's shirts on a rack. Every shirt is perfectly spaced. Every shirt is exactly the same color. And there's only one of each design. And if you want that shirt, you literally have to tell them and they'll go in the back room and get you the shirt. It came out in a bag with a Stussy logo. And I was just in coolest experience ever. Like I didn't understand it, but it was the coolest thing. And everything was just so neat, so stark white. And I fell in love with it. And I said, I got to do this in Buffalo. So I did. The Orchard Park store was a minimalist boutique and it did really well until and being a young kid, I didn't know anything about economics and market cycles and any of the stuff that I studied today, but that was right before the dot-com crash took full force. So as I built this new store, we were open about I think it was about a year, and then the dot-com crash hit. How's that for luck, right? It just brought me to my knees. I remember I was highly leveraged. I had a lot of debt at that point, debt to vendors, and I just couldn't keep it together. And I ended up literally deciding to close that boutique, consolidate it all into the other stores. So we had two locations. We did a little winter like Christmas store in the Walden Galleria, which is the biggest mall here, even still today. But I ended up having to get a job. I needed a job because I couldn't continue with the stores and support myself because it really was no family at that time. It was just me. But that's how bad things got. So I put my resume out, which fit on one piece of paper because I really didn't have much of a resume. And I got responses. I got two responses, not just one, but two from Wall Street firms. And I'm like, what the heck? Like these letters would come in and like, we'd like you to show up for an interview, please wear a suit, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't even own a suit, but Grandma Naugle knew exactly where to take me, Lurch and Dallies, to get my first suit.
Yep.
And that's no longer anymore. I'm dating myself big.
Oh
But
yeah.
I went on these interviews and, there was two companies and I ended up liking the one more than the other. And I ended up getting licensed and, starting with that firm to very quickly realize the firm was just shady as hell. So I
Mhm.
left before I even brought one client on. I went on some sales calls with some of the salespeople because
Mhm.
that's how they trained you. And I'm like, there's no way I can do this. Like what you guys doing is high pressure. And that company ended up getting shut down. So thank God I didn't stay there. But they were just all flash and fluff. So I ended up taking the job with that second company that interviewed me, which was one of the larger New York City. They're a New York based financial firm. They're huge, been around since the 1800s. And I worked in Wall Street for 16 years of my life. For that firm, I worked for that firm for 14 years. And I did that while still running my stores. But that's why I was able to make it through that tough patch. That's why I didn't go bankrupt, why I didn't have to close the shops down. I just pivoted. And
Yeah.
the most, for any entrepreneurs that are listening to this, I think one of the things, I mean, you're hearing a lot of hustle and grind in here because that's all I knew back then. But
Mhm.
one of the other things that happened when I stopped working in the business and I started working in Wall Street, and I was forced to work on the business. So Fat Man,
Mhm.
then I wasn't in the store every day like I used to be. I gave power to my couple of my friends who worked for me, and they became the managers, and they actually did a better job than I did. So the store started doing really well, and I was able to focus on working on it. I got really good at putting on events, and those events would bring in thousands of dollars a day for the stores. And then I would start working on marketing campaigns and building the snowboard team and the skateboard team, moving on to making our first videos and like literally full on DVDs, that we would air in theaters. So I got to work on all this really cool stuff that I could have probably never done if kept working in the business, if the dot-com crash didn't happen. So a lot of times, in your journey of entrepreneurship or anything you're doing, one door is going to slam shut in your face. Just
Mhm.
know that happened for a reason because another door opened. You just got to walk through it. And Wall Street just happened to be that door I walked through, and I made a lot of money in Wall Street, a lot of money. And I took a lot of that money and I used that to build my businesses, whether it was Fat Man or Foxy Girl, which was a little boutique girls women's store that I did, to I went on and did additional clothing lines, and then not only that, I got into real estate and I started flipping houses and I started doing all sorts of other things. But none of that could have happened if I didn't have that Wall Street job that paid, that I earned good money on, and I still kept my focus and my dream on the entrepreneur side. And Fat Man had run its course right after the Great Recession, which was 2008. I had bought a strip mall, almost went bankrupt because of the Great Recession hit. Kind of, so you're seeing two recessions during my era as a shop owner, a skateboard shop owner, and also one big recession as a financial advisor. But during that period after that, I had just gotten so beat up. There wasn't enough time in the day. I was really juggling who I wanted to be when I grew up. Do I want to be a financial advisor? I mean, I was in a good position. I was number two in the office.
Mhm.
Or do I want to be an entrepreneur? And I had this really weird internal battle going on. But when the Great Recession hit, I literally almost lost it all again, and that's when I kinda another, window opened, and that was real estate. I
Nice.
started, diving deep into real estate. I sold Fat Man in 2010. I sold that strip mall that I developed in 2014 to fuel the dream of the HGTV show.
And Batman's still around. I think that's one thing to too. It's
Yeah,
it's been still going strong.
heck of a
I
legacy, man. I don't own
uh,
it, but, it's still super strong.
just got my board wax there the other day, so it's always good. But so financial advisor, I kind of want to speed through because I want to go into kind of what you're doing now. So I want to go into the TV show because that was a huge entrepreneurs, like you're saying, one of the things we are incredibly resilient and we will find a way to make it work when things go wrong. And I think the show is your big play. It was a huge thing for you. And I kind of I'd like you to go into the story about that, then go into like Flip Out and Money School, what you're doing now, and kind of that story.
Yeah, so just like everything else, remember I said earlier, my mom always taught me to dream, so I was a dreamer. Me and my wife, when we got into real estate, we bought into this education program, and we were at a summit out in Las Vegas, and two TV show stars walked onto the stage, and we were in the front row, and I remember just being starstruck, and I remember thinking, I want that. I want to get up on a stage like that. I want to speak. I want to tell my story. My wife thought I was crazy, but I looked at her. I said, "Sweetie, if we're ever going to get on that stage, we got to have a TV show."
Yeah.
So that was the big idea. Right there, right then, I started writing the ideas. I couldn't get it out of my head. I came back from that trip in Las Vegas and I called Kyle, who used to run my stores. He was one of my friends, but Kyle was also the guy that made the videos.
Uh-huh.
And I said, Kyle, I said, I want to film a show. I want it to be like Jackass meets Flip or Flop, and I want to do this. I had all these crazy ideas. And I'm like, I can't really pay you what you're normally getting paid for filming, but, what would you be able to do it for this? So I came up with a retainer. I think it was like 2,000 bucks a month, which was a stretch for me back then. And he took the project on and we literally created sizzle reels, which we sent off to different production houses, and we got picked up right away by a production house in Toronto. And they did a great job. They built more sizzle reels. They sold us out there, but we just couldn't get traction. So
Yeah.
that kind of died on the vine. That was about a year's time frame, that contract. When the contract ended, they didn't renew it, and we ended up, kind of deciding were we going to really be able to get a show, but we wanted to give it one last shot. We had another production house that worked really closely with HGTV, and we ended up doing our sizzle, our pilot. We got it greenlit from HGTV, and then we went through there's a whole process. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but it's
Yep.
it's just monotonous. And but we ended up like coming out of that whole thing. They call it out of green light in number 2 position. Like we were the second runner-up show, which is the best position you could ever be in, because that means you're pretty much going to series. And we aired 6 times, and I'll never forget the night when I got the call. I got the
Mhm.
call. We thought everything was going to be good. This is a life-changing opportunity, or at least so I thought. That, I'm going to get this national television show, and we're going to be superstars, and we're going to be flipping our way to fame. And that call was from the producer, and they basically said, "Hey, listen, I got bad news.
You,
Discovery, who just bought HGTV, isn't going to proceed with any new shows."
yeah.
That's it.
I
Door slammed.
remember the look on your face because you walked to my office that next morning, and the look on your face is etched into my memory from that moment. Yeah. Yeah, it was a big thing. I mean, you really
It
had
was
worked
hard.
really hard for this thing and it didn't work. I mean, and it is what it is. It was a great show. I mean, it was an awesome concept, but yeah. Yeah. So
It was the
then
best. It was the best thing that ever happened, or I should say, the best thing that ever didn't happen is that show, because I
yeah,
think my life would be very different if that show actually did go,
yeah.
and it wouldn't be where it is today, and I wouldn't be chasing the path or following the path that I am now, which is, I think, the right one to be on.
Well, I think the industry itself, without going into a whole lot of details, I think that the learning industry and real estate took a really weird pivot right after that too. So it ended up being just a blessing in disguise as far as not being stuck in what was eventually a massive mess. So I think there
It
was
was.
definitely some divine guidance there. But so then because I've been writing a presentation for you on this, so it's all fresh in my mind right now. But so yeah, money school. Go on
Yeah.
to that and
So
kind of where
money
that got.
school. So, during that whole TV show little stint, we had created a company called, I was still an advisor. So I didn't retire from Wall Street until 2018, which is right when our show aired. And that's the reason I retired and sold my practice as an advisor. But we had this company called Flip Out Academy.
Mhm.
Was real estate education. We would, get students, and we service this all. We built a whole studio, a whole facility. It was like 8,000 square feet to facilitate, the show and flipping and education and all the things that we had dreamed up, because it was all just one giant dream, folks. That's all it's
Mhm.
ever been. And yeah, flip out just was more of a headache. I loved it, but I hated it. And
Mhm.
and I let everybody know that in the offices. And I hated it not because of what we were doing, but I hated it because it was the first time in my life where I saw that people just don't inherently want to do anything to make themselves better. They want everybody else to do it for them. So as a coach, I was coaching people to try to teach them how to fish, and all they wanted me to do is go fish for them. And I remember I had a couple bad students that I probably took it way too personal, and those students just like literally drove me mad.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting there one day with the team, and I can't remember his name, but anyway, he was sitting there, and I'm talking money. I'm always talking money, right? I'm supposed to be teaching real estate. I'm always talking money, money, and like, here's how to make money, and here's private lending and all these things. And I was infatuated with private lending and being the bank. And I had learned about this thing called the infinite banking concept during this period of time. And I was so just excited, I guess is the word, about this infinite banking thing and how you could use that to make your money work twice for you, and the same dollar's earning interest and dividends while you're using the dollar to buy real estate or lend on real estate. And I just so excited about that. That's all I ever talked about. And I remember sitting in a staff meeting, and somebody said to me, "Chris, you got to get all these ideas you have in on paper, and you got to write a book." So Private Money Guide was my very first book. I wrote it when I was on a vacation with my wife in Mexico, and that book still sells quite a few copies today. And that's where it all began. Money School literally was created out of a book, and out of this innate inner drive to want to talk about money instead of talking about just real estate. But we initially mixed it, and it was originally Real Estate Money School, and then we dropped the real estate part and it was just Money School. And then we kind of morphed it to Money School BYOB, which is what it is today, which is Be Your Own Bank. And that's all I teach people to do today is I teach them how to take back control of their money by teaching them how to be the bank. And this is nothing that I created. This is literally hundreds of years old. This has been being done by the wealthiest families throughout history. And the funniest thing is just nobody seems to know about it, but they're starting to learn about it really quick now.
Yeah, because again, like you say, the ultimate thing is being the bank and teaching people how to do that. And money in a sitting in a 401k. How many people have a 401k just sitting around that's at an old employer? They have no idea what the hell to do with it. And so, how am I going to use that money instead of having large institutional lenders go out and lend things and kind of getting from traditional banks and the various things that we've always been taught how to do? How do I do that with my own? I mean,
Yep.
most people aren't going to think about lending from their IRA, right?
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating concept because
Yeah.
at the root of it, it's exactly what people are doing already. It just changes one thing, and that's where their money goes first, and then adds one step. And if people can't change one thing and add one step, well, I don't know how they tie their shoes and get in their car and drive. But I mean,
That's for
it's
sure,
literally
right?
that simple. But what makes it so complicated is it is a 180-degree mental switch from what you have been taught your whole life. And I always tell people, I said, what you've been taught about money is one lie. It's one giant lie from start to finish. The way you've been taught money works is not the way money works. And that's what we do. We teach the truth about money.
Yeah. So go into a little bit about PMC because we're kind of getting towards the end here, but I do want you to be able to get a hit for that one too. We'll put a link in the description, by the way, for Private Money Club and Money School and a couple of other things. But yeah, so Private Money Club and the napkin and you and Steven and the
Yeah.
bar
So
at night.
we were doing money school. I was speaking all over the place on infinite banking. And I remember sitting at a bar with Stephen
Yeah.
Nagy, the Snaggy.
Yes.
And I said, I got this idea, Stephen. I said, there's this massive problem. I've been trying to lend my money because at that point I had amassed some money and I'd sold off some of my real estate. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, why is there not one place where all the borrowers and all the lenders can go to either lend or borrow? Like, and I couldn't understand it. And I searched long and hard trying to find this, and it didn't exist. So on a piece of paper, I drew a circle. On one side, I said, there's only two types of people in the world. There's people that have money. So on one side, I put have, right? People that have money. And on the other side of the circle, I put the other people. People need, they need money. So there's people that have and people that need. And in the beginning, it was just real estate because that's something I understood. I knew, like, and understood real estate. So I said, people that have real estate deals that want to get money like I used to, they can come to this community, this online community that we're going to build. And it's just like a dating site. It's a dating site for money. People with money meet people that need money, and they both, get together and they make little babies, which is called more money. And that's what I created. And that became what today is privatemoneyclub.com, which
Yeah.
is the first of its kind. And I later found out why nobody had done it when I started understanding the legal and regulatory side of it. No
Yeah.
wonder nobody did it, but I was too far. I was too far invested in because I failed to do that study on the legal and the regulations before launching and spending a whole bunch of money designing it. So I was kind of already like, oh crap, I'm already committed to this. We better figure this thing out, and we
Mhm.
did. And we are about to launch 3.0, which is the third version of the
Mhm.
software, and it is going to completely disrupt the banking industry as we know it today.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're ready to do that in a couple of months here. So that'll be a good thing. And it's been a long time coming and it's been a long road on it. But there's times when sometimes you just fight for what you believe in. And I mean, I guess for you, that's been for you one of the biggest things is fighting for what you believe in, right? And
Always.
fighting for this, this education. So before we go, I always ask my guests one question. What is a podcast or book that you would recommend that's changed your life?
Think and Grow Rich. I still listen to that.
Yeah.
And I would suggest anyone wants the quick and down and dirty, listen to the Earl Nightingale version of him reading Think and Grow Rich.
Hmm. Nice. That book changed my life. I just reread it a couple of months ago, and I usually about once a year will reread that book because there's so much wisdom in it. And this was done over almost 100 years ago, and
Yeah.
it's over 100 years ago at this point, and still is relevant to this day. And I think it's something that we do as that's always a very good idea to do is to get around people that are smarter, that are richer, that are more successful than we are, and mimic what they're doing. And that's what he did with the start of that book. So it's also a personal favorite of mine. So
100%.
Well, Chris, you have been an awesome mentor over the past 7 years. I think we've been working together, something like that. You've been an amazing friend, man, and I am just incredibly honored to have you on the podcast today. I really appreciate you.
Thanks. It was a real pleasure.
Cool,
Hopefully
cool.
it helps some people that are dreamers and visionaries to go out there and do what they've always wanted to do.
I'm sure it will, man. Awesome. Thanks, bud.
Thanks.
Thanks again for joining us on the Hustle and Grind podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Chris, check out the link in the description.